This is a total disaster.
February 11th, and for the first time, a power plant near St. Petersburg has been blown up.
This is insane.
Hundreds of thousands are in blackout in the Leningrad region. The smell is just pure burning. They're crackling all over the street, burning. And from the bridge, it looks like everything is just on fire. Meanwhile, in Belgorod, there's a humanitarian catastrophe.
And that's how it is in Belgorod every couple of hours.
The power's out. Oh, that was really close by. Bryansk, Belgorod, Leningrad region, explosions at power plants, no electricity, water or heat.
We're screwed.
Whoa, hold on a second.
Oh.
The governor has announced a total evacuation.
Hello, dear friends. We are facing a rather difficult situation, and it continues. And with a sharp drop in temperature, we are making the decision to drain the heating systems in 455 apartment buildings.
Our Western partners, so to speak, are supplying them with these weapons, and HIMARS are flying over Russia. Another one hit there. Unbelievable.
Let me show you how I survive in Belgorod. Because of the latest missile threats, I haven't had hot water or heating for 3 days now, and sometimes there was no electricity either. Just a moment, in the coming week we'll have frosts of 15 to 20 degrees. I'm inserting clips from yesterday for you. We were making these little things, but that's not really the point. I just want to talk about this mess because I have no idea what to film or post. And yesterday was just plain stupid. I went outside, they announced a missile alert, and I ran as fast as I could. I didn't even realize how I ended up in the entranceway. It was insanely scary, and the most interesting thing is, we're not officially being switched to remote learning. There's no heating in our university either. That's why you don't see any videos or vlogs from me in Belgorod, because the situation is terrible and it's simply impossible to live here. That's all for now. I hope I'll be able to get in touch again soon.
So, I finally decided to stop skimping on myself and bought myself something. Look, check this thing out. A powerful heater, because, you know, it's kind of chilly.
They barely managed to deal with blackouts in Murmansk, Russia, when suddenly a substation explodes in the Leningrad region. Russia can't fix its own energy sector, instead it destroys others. In the Bryansk region, the key Novobryansk substation has been damaged. Blackout, no electricity or heat. And in Belgorod, there's a humanitarian disaster. Children are being urgently evacuated. The governor reports that so far there's no help from anyone.
Unfortunately, it's not a good evening, dear friends. Nighttime enemy shelling.
There, preparations are underway for an emergency discharge of the heating system due to massive strikes on the energy infrastructure. The region has suffered significant damage, the governor states. The SBU struck a plant in the Tver region that produces fuel components for Kh-55 and Kh-101 missiles. And now there's an uproar in the Russian segment. Urgently turn off all Starlinks and hide them, because Ukraine has gained access to the geolocations of all Starlink terminals in the temporarily occupied territories.
The same goes for the Starlink shutdown. It showed that we have nothing. There's no replacement for it because the Azov space program has been almost completely destroyed and nothing has been restored. Fools, corrupt officials. No, spies, agents, and traitors. And who took billions of dollars abroad right before the start of the special military operation, which were then frozen.
Such a commotion among the Rashists amuses us. And finally, Gurulyov called for a large-scale mobilization after the Starlink shutdown.
Now is not the time for bloggers or war correspondents. They've started to stir up panic. So, the Americans have shut off our Starlinks, and now, supposedly, the front will collapse. But it won't collapse. Marshal Zhukov fought without Starlinks, with manpower, and made it all the way to Berlin. In the same way, we must mobilize everyone to the maximum. Men, students, everyone, and finish off Ukraine.
Let's discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health. Roman.
Grigorievich, what's happening in Moscow City? Are they blowing up or threatening to blow up the towers in Moscow City now? The area is cordoned off. Special services have arrived. As I understand it, things are serious. What do you think?
Well, the issue there is about the ownership of Moscow City. Right now, they're forcing the Russian company that owns Moscow City to sell it. There are serious shortcomings in payments to the budget. So the Russians have a problem, that's for sure. It's the economy. It's not for nothing we've been at this for half a year. Last year, Russian oil refineries were operating at a loss. That really hit the Russian economy hard. Now they've stopped. That's a big problem. If they had kept going, Moscow City would have already been burned from the inside. But for now, Moscow City itself is being used by everyone from the concerned to the completely crazy. There can be all sorts of situations related specifically to pressure. This is a regime, well, at the very least, a regime of squeezing certain people out of power, out of the Russian government naturally, because there is a certain object that is attracting attention, drawing the focus of a large number of people. For example, the population is constantly swirling around in the information space. No matter where you look, you'll inevitably end up in some direction leading to Moscow. Everyone understands perfectly well what these towers are and how many billions they are worth. Naturally, pressure of this kind on the Russian information community and on the Russian authorities definitely exists. So where will this lead? Well, it's clear that Russians are now trying to steer all this somehow into some kind of acceptable direction. Naturally, we brought in the security forces, but nevertheless, we've drawn attention for 2 days now. At the very least, Moscow is shaken up. And in the end, will Moscow City actually burn or not? Because if it does burn, that's a point of invincibility, a free heating point, at least for people to warm up. Russians are experts at free heating after all.
Yes, so far 3 people have been detained and the information is being updated. Meanwhile, the SBU struck a plant in the Tursk region that produces fuel components for Kh-55 and Kh-101 missiles. Roman Igorevich, what do you have to say?
He's already taken control himself. We talked about this before. When we removed Malyuk, remember our Ukrainian combat general? We removed him and someone else stepped in, at least for now, and that's him. But still, General Kamara has taken over, and he's just like Malyuk. Ukrainocentrism is in his genes, that's the least of it, of course. The only problem when changing any leader is that it takes 3 to 4 weeks to fully seize power and establish proper management. Now we can say that security has already stabilized and is carrying out combat missions as planned, according to our vision, meaning it is destroying Russian targets. Rear facilities. By the way, there was a rather dangerous plant for us in Tver. It seems small on the one hand, not to be compared with Ural Vagon Zavod, but it produced components and assemblies for missiles, specifically the Kh-101, which are dangerous for us. Well, of that level and such, of course, the security service determines a certain sequence based on the priority of tasks and then carries them out as always, just like in recent years under Malyuk. The security service was putting pressure on Russian rear positions. Let's continue. So you could say the service is back in action. The security service is back in action again. And basically, we will see the security service at work at least every other day, just like under Malyuk. Malyuk is now working on developing new mechanisms for destroying Russians. He will still prove himself in this regard.
Roman Lvovich, they had barely managed to deal with the blackouts in Russia's Urmansk and Severomorsk, where the northern fleet of the Russian Federation is based, while the sailors there were shouting, "Putin help! Putin SOS!" And then a substation explodes in the Leningrad region. It turns out that Russia can't manage its own energy sector and instead destroys someone else's. A huge number of residents are left without light and heat there, so basically power plants are mysteriously exploding near St. Petersburg. What do you have to say about that?
Well, there are people who care. We don't just talk with you for no reason. Sometimes we discuss what needs to be done to strike a blow to the Russian economy. And what is the energy sector? A thermal power plant is part of the electric power industry. That's fundamental. It's actually very easy to sabotage it, starting with something as simple as unscrewing not a valve, but those plugs for draining oil, set it on fire, and everything will burn down in blue flames. Not blue, it'll burn black. It'll be visible from far away. And then there are the specialists, the energy engineers, who know exactly where, for example, to block a certain line or shut off some network protection circuit breaker. And in the end, an overload will burn down the whole station. Plus, let's not forget, it's not for nothing that you mentioned Murmansk. So the problem with Murmansk was that these were old Soviet power lines, old Soviet pylons, which simply collapsed under the weight of the ice. And the same old Soviet infrastructure, except for Moscow, is practically everywhere in all directions, old Soviet energy technology. Naturally, it just needs a little help to break down. It's been wanting to die for a long time now, just like the Soviet Union. In other words, to follow its leader, so to speak, over there. Let's get a closer look at the frame. So that's exactly what's happening. Naturally, specialists who know how to do this are helping. our concerned citizens who are trying to take down the Russian economy. While our authorities are debating whether or not to strike at the Russian oil industry, at the same time, there are concerned individuals working to at least take down the Russian energy sector.
Roman Nikolaevich, in the Bryansk region, the key Novobryanskaya substation has been damaged. No electricity, no heat, no water. Once again, a humanitarian catastrophe. What do you have to say?
This is the execution of combat missions by our Neptunes. So it's already confirmed, at least you can see it in the video footage. It's good footage. I think Dasha will show our listeners and viewers this flight of the Neptune. The range is already several hundred kilometers. These are most likely Neptunes with extended fuel tanks. A range of 300 to 400 kilometers, so they can carry out this combat mission. High precision missiles. And if, for example, there's a strike on transformers, you get the same effect as if you unscrewed the cap and set the oil on fire, or say a missile arrives with several hundred kilograms in its warhead, highly accurate, with a circular probable deviation of 1.5 to 2 meters. The specialists at the Luch Design Bureau did a very good job, that is with the homing head. From ground-to-air missiles to the base ship-launched KH-35, they first created the Neptune missiles for ship-to-ground, then made ground-to-ground versions, those very missiles that are now even surprising the Russians. CEP. The Russians don't have anything like this on any of their missiles, unlike our Neptunes. So in this regard, of course, the Luch Design Bureau has demonstrated innovation, that is, innovative approaches to missile guidance, and naturally their expertise. This needs to be applied to other missiles as well, including the Flamingo, so that in the end, they not only hit the planet or just the general area of Kapustin Yar, but at least manage to hit a single hazel bush at launch.
Roman Nikolaevich, there is no doubt that there is also a humanitarian catastrophe in Belgorod. Right now, children are being evacuated there. The governor stated that it's not just that, it is necessary to evacuate almost everyone. They are preparing for an emergency discharge of the heating system there. Due to massive strikes on the energy infrastructure, the region has suffered significant damage. And the governor also says that unfortunately there is nowhere to expect help from. What do you think?
This confirms what you and I, Dasha, have been saying for several years. Residents of Belgorod, Bryansk, Kursk, Voronezh, and Rostov regions, these are the so-called transborder regions that border Ukraine, need to leave these areas. And if you remember, at first Russians just laughed it off. I read the comments, but now people are taking it seriously. To avoid having to move twice, it's better to leave for beyond the Urals right away. This applies to Russians. As for Ukrainians, we understand perfectly well. Belgorod region is our Ukrainian land, and of course, there are quite a few Ukrainians there. Ukrainians, in principle, can stay and wait, at least for now. They mostly live in our villages. For some reason, Russians call them villages, but these are our Ukrainian villages. And in Kursk, Bryansk, Belgorod, Novovoronezh, and Rostov regions, all the way to Kuban. Ukrainian villages used to be called Cossack stanitsas there. By the way, those were our Cossacks from Zaporizhia. So this is our land, and it will remain home to our genetic, you could say, Ukrainian, at the very least, Ukrainian families. Well, and the Russians should crawl back since they came here, since they didn't want to live as neighbors. But they forgot one thing. Ukrainians, after all, protect their borders. Don't cross the border, if anyone knows what that means. They've hidden the secret. That's the problem. So to the Russians, I'll say it again. We talked about this a couple of years ago. Move away. It's better to move straight to the Urals, beyond the Urals, so you don't have to move twice, because our Flamingo's wings will reach there. And I think that someday, instead of mock ballistic missiles, real ballistic missiles with a range of up to 2,000 kilometers all the way to the Urals will appear. We will reach them. It's very important for us to be able to reach Uralvagonzavod, to reach the military factories in the Urals. We probably won't go beyond the Urals, because what would we even do in China? Beyond the Urals, that's where China will be. Let them start learning Chinese right away and get themselves plastic surgery to change the shape of their eyes so they won't look too different from the Chinese. The European part, that is the European part of Russia, the European part of the Eurasian continent, will be populated by normal people. But that rabble which once crawled into Europe from beyond the Urals needs to be driven back. And over there, Xi Jinping will whip them into shape. They like marching on the parade ground anyway. They'll be marching around, singing songs, shouting chants, celebrating May Day. Well, they're specialists at that sort of thing. And in Belgorod, nothing party related will be operating anymore, that's for sure. It will be a military rear area. That's why I say, if you didn't want to be good neighbors, then deal with the consequences. Why? Because it's a military rear area. For us, it's important to cut off all energy in that direction. Again, not just in Belgorod. Why Belgorod? Because right now the Russians are trying to advance from the Belgorod area towards Kharkiv and Kupiansk. And for us, these directions are important right now. And then for sure, it will move both north and south, that is to the northwest as well, including towards the Kursk and Bryansk regions. We will keep hitting them. We've already struck Bryansk, for example. By the way, that's the 750 kilovolt substation, which is located practically near Bryansk. This 750 substation supplied power to the southern technological corridor of the Moscow energy ring. That's why I don't rule out the possibility, including preparations for further actions, specifically for a blackout towards Moscow and Voronezh and Rostov as well. Of course, because basically reaching them isn't a problem, especially not for Tunaev. The only problem is that we don't have many for Tuna. That's the issue. But for such a cause to drive all these hordes of Russians back beyond the Urals, I think we'll find more missiles, especially since our partners are helping us.
Roman Lvovich, the situation is as follows. Gurlyov is reporting, urgently turn off all Starlink devices, hide them. There's an uproar in the Russian segment because of rumors that Ukraine has gained access to the geolocations of all Starlink terminals in the temporarily occupied territories. Such a commotion is certainly amusing to us, but let's really assess this professionally. At first, there was information that Starlink wasn't working, and accordingly, the Russians were having problems. As a result, at this point, they are completely disoriented. Offensive actions have ceased. Without communication, the Russian front has collapsed. After that, this information appeared that they need to turn them off completely because Ukraine is tracking the geolocation of all Starlink terminals in the temporarily occupied territories. Please give your assessment of this.
Well, it can definitely be tracked, but it's not Ukraine, it's Musk who's tracking it. And for some reason lately, Musk has taken a certain stance towards Trump. Trump is cozying up to Putin. Something didn't work out between Trump and Musk started helping Ukraine. The most interesting thing is he's not even flying to Mars anymore. Now he's going to the moon. So those Trump campaign slogans, at least, let's go as all of America to Mars, definitely won't work anymore. Because Musk is going to the moon and America, well, it's unlikely they'll all go to the moon. There's no atmosphere there. They won't be breathing down each other's necks. So right now, it's definitely the Russians who have problems. Musk has most likely started helping us, and providing the geolocation of all the Starlinks, for example, is basically possible. That is either giving access to the keys for a specific geolocation or in some other way transmitting the location of the Russians. In other words, where the Starlinks are located. In general, you can use Starlink as a targeting reference. That is, the guidance system for missiles or drones could be precisely, it's not just about the geolocation, but about an active Starlink or a Starlink that is simply turned on at the moment, and the satellites can see it through triangulation. You can pinpoint the location to within about plus or minus 1.5 meters, and that's enough for a missile to hit or to target it with a laser beam as well. That's also possible, and now there are a lot of missiles that have received this kind of targeting capability, which are guided by reflected laser signals. That's why the Russians really do have a problem with Starlinks at the moment. To what extent will our countermeasures work there? Striking Starlinks is another matter, or for example, the mass use of strike systems. But the fact is the Russians were left without communication for a certain period of time until they deploy their own. They have their own communications, they have their own satellites of various types. They just don't want to carry those dishes around. Those are real dishes, about 1.5 to 2 meters wide, these communication systems, and they fall under our electronic warfare. And first of all, we can see them well, which is even better. In a way, it makes targeting easier, at least when it comes to the dishes. That's why the Russians will have problems in the near future. By the way, our defense forces have started taking advantage of this. In some positions, they've already moved into counteroffensive actions at the tactical level.
Gurlev called for a large-scale mobilization. After the disconnection of Starlink, the deputy stated that the shutdown of satellite communication systems should not be a cause for panic. And he spoke in favor of expanding mobilization measures from men to students immediately. Roman Lvovich, how are things going with mobilization in Russia? And of course, what do you think of Gurlev's initiative?
Well, he separates men and students, which is the most interesting part. I don't really understand by what criteria, right? So there's a big question with Russians. How do they even determine gender? That's one thing. Second, what's the point of activating a forced mobilization mechanism? Are they going to set up a chain all the way to the satellite? Or will they be sending information with maritime flags using Morse code? That's just unrealistic. I understand that perfectly well. This shows that Grulyov has practically highlighted a problem that Russians will be facing in the near future. Right now, thanks to the actions of our defense forces, far more Russian soldiers are being eliminated than before. They already understand this perfectly well. In other words, the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction. Now there is no longer any balance. We are now reducing Russian numbers by about 7,000 to 10,000 more per month than they are reducing ours, than they are able to bring into service. And now this is the problem. In other words, they are simply trying to cover up the main problem of a shortage of personnel in the Russian army by distracting with some other issue related to Musk. Basically, get in line or else we won't have a connection with Musk's satellite. How is that supposed to help? Will it help? Well, that's a big question. After all, Russians always have a problem with logic.
Ukraine has launched a counteroffensive at the junction of the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, according to Russian war correspondents. Now, I'll quote them. The offensive is coming from the direction of Pokrovsk, Volokovo-Makalivka, Ternuvatove, and Huliaipol, aiming to split Russian forces and get behind their lines. What do you think?
A few months ago, you and I talked about where the Russians were trying to break through in Pokrovsk, remember, several times. Not Pokrovsk, but Pokrovsk. What is Pokrovsk? Why is this settlement important for us? And for the Russians as well, for that matter. It is located on the Donetsk-Zaporizhzhia highway. And from there, a road also goes from Pokrovsk, from this main highway. There is a road leading to Huliaipole. At one time, this was the main supply route, meaning the main logistical chain for delivering military equipment. Our garrison is located specifically in Huliaipole. The Russians accomplished their first objective. They cut off this road. Now they were trying to accomplish a second objective, to reach Pokrovsk directly, so that they could then use the Donetsk-Zaporizhzhia highway to approach Zaporizhzhia from the northeast, effectively cutting off our two garrisons in Huliaipole and Voho. And this objective, let's put it mildly, the Russians wanted to overachieve. In other words, they dug in the sense that they went deep, they rushed forward without establishing any proper defensive lines. And now essentially this direction is on the one hand a priority for the Russians, but at the same time, it lacks what you might call operational substance. To put it simply for clarity. So the front line is where the Russians are running. There they are, but just a few kilometers behind them, it's already our land, which is technically considered occupied by the Russians, but there are no Russians there. Right now, they don't have enough forces or resources. Actually, controlling this is what's called operational substance. It's like supposedly captured territory. So from a tactical point of view, it actually makes sense that with the right preparation, again, as we discussed, what is needed? A military operation needed to be carried out there. So most likely it may have just started now. Of course, for now, it's just Russian social media channels making noise, trying to stir things up. But from a logical standpoint, there is definitely such a possibility. And to cut off the Russians, what's especially interesting is that both the Huliaipol direction and the Pokrovsk direction can be cut off. If you advance from the south, say, towards Novoselka, Velika Novosilka, or Bohatir, it will all depend on the amount of forces and resources available. For us, it's unlikely, let's say, that we'll be able to break through to a depth of several dozen kilometers right away, but we can cut them off by a few kilometers. And in principle, they blockade the Huliaipol garrison. That's one. And not allow the Russians to continue offensive operations in the Dnipropetrovsk region. That is by advancing towards Pokrovsk, which, by the way, is in the Dnipropetrovsk region, and further north towards Mezhova. In other words, not allowing the Russians to regroup. From the city of Pokrovsk, that's the southern left flank, which can be cut off. But from Huliaipol, it's the northern right flank. It can be cut off from our side, or rather from the Russian side. And by making such a cut to split this front from Huliaipol to Pokrovsk, to divide it, and then depending on the available forces and resources, again, it all directly depends on the forces and resources that our command has concentrated in this direction. Sirski, we've talked about this with you several times. He is strong in operational and tactical tasks. He really is strong. In other words, he's a good commander who handles operational and tactical tasks. And at the moment, he's the best, at least among the generals currently leading the operations. So here, if this really turns out to be true, what the Russians are now hyping up in almost all their public channels, then believe me, there will definitely be a positive effect there. Remember the same Kursk operation. It just ended badly. They should have pulled back in time. This is where Syrskyi has a problem. He pays attention to the politicians. Now, if he sends those politicians who start telling him where to go, what to do, what to grab, on the same course as the Russian warship, remember we talked about that, on a short sexual journey, then this operation to cut through the Haliapol, the search for the Pokrovsky direction, it could actually end with quite a good result.